He told me we were going on a relaxing trip. We drove into the mountains. Near the summit, he smiled and said, "Dad, take a picture of me." The moment I stepped out, the engine roared. The car vanished down the road, leaving me stranded on the edge of nowhere. And that was only the beginning. My name is Thomas Reed. I'm 62 years old, retired mechanic. Not rich, not powerful, just a man who worked 40 years with his hands and paid off his house one bolt and paycheck at a time. That house is all I have left since my wife passed. And it's exactly what my son has been circling like a vulture. His name is Derek, 34, always selfish, always greedy. When he was a boy, I used to tell myself he'd grow out of it. He didn't. His wife, Rachel, only sharpened it. If Derek was a spark, she was a gasoline. When they asked me to go on a break, I suspected nothing. I thought maybe it was his attempt to mend our fractured bond. But standing on that mountainside, staring down the road as his taillights vanished, I understood the truth. This wasn't a break. This was a test. A way to push me to the edge, to break me, to make me desperate enough to hand him what he wanted. My house. The wind cut cold through my jacket. My phone had no signal. For a long while, I just stood there, staring at the empty road, feeling the weight of betrayal heavier than the silence of the mountains. I forced myself down the trail, step by step, until at last I stumbled into a small roadside diner hours later, boots caked in dust, throat dry as bone. The waitress froze when she saw me, ragged, pale, exhausted. "Sir, are you okay?" "I need water," I croaked, "and a phone." By nightfall, I was back in town. Not home. Not yet. Something inside me told me walking through my front door would be exactly what Derek was counting on. So instead, I checked into a cheap roadside motel under cash. I sat on the thin bedspread, staring at the cracked wallpaper, and replayed every detail of that drive. His words, his smile, the way Rachel had insisted I pack light and leave my wallet behind because Derek will handle everything. That detail hit me hard. My wallet was gone. My ID, my credit cards, my keys. He had stripped me of everything before we even left. This wasn't clumsy cruelty. It was calculated. The next morning, I bought a notebook and pen from a gas station. I began writing down everything. Times, dates, conversations, small details. Years of turning bolts and engines had taught me the value of precision. If Derek wanted a game, I would play it, but I'd keep the record. I called an old acquaintance, a lawyer named Graham, who once fixed a dispute over my workshop lease. He listened without interruption as I told him what happened. When I finished, there was a long pause. "Thomas," he said finally, "your son is maneuvering for a legal transfer, probably planning to declare you unfit, missing, or both. He can't do that without help. Someone else is involved. Maybe a notary, maybe a banker. Rachel," I muttered, "it has to be Rachel." But Graham only sighed. "Check wider. People don't run a scam like this alone." That thought sat in my gut like lead. 2 days later, I slipped back into town. I didn't go home. Instead, I walked into O'Malley's bar, the place Derek always bragged about. Sure enough, there he was, beer in hand, laughing with his friends. I stood outside the window in the rain, listening. "Old man's finally out of the way," Derek was boasting. "House will be in my name soon. Rachel's already talking renovations." His friends roared with laughter. But then came the words that chilled me most. "Graham's buddy at the bank says once the papers are signed, it's locked. Dad won't have a say. He doesn't even know what's coming." Graham's buddy. My lawyer had been right. There was someone else in this. I clenched my fists, rain running down my coat. Derek thought he'd buried me on that mountain. He thought I'd crawl back broken or vanish quietly. Instead, I was standing a few feet from him, alive, listening. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like the victim. I felt dangerous. And I knew exactly where to start. I didn't sleep that night. I sat on the thin mattress of the motel, notebook open, replaying Derek's words in my head. He wasn't just bragging in that bar. He had a plan, and it was already moving. The next morning, I called Graham again. You were right, I told him. He's working with someone at the bank. He bragged about it. There was a pause on the line. Thomas, listen carefully. If your son has an inside man at the bank, they could already be moving to freeze or transfer assets. You can't walk back into your house like nothing happened. You need to secure everything before you set foot there. Then we do it, I said. My voice felt steadier than my hands. By noon, Graham had me sitting in a quiet office downtown with a specialist in elder exploitation law. She was younger, sharp-eyed, and didn't waste words. She explained what Derek might try. File for a wellness check to claim I was missing or mentally unfit. Use a falsified power of attorney to sell the house. Leverage debts and repairs to move cash into his name. I listened in silence. Each scenario was worse than the last, but all of them pointed to the same truth. Derek and Rachel had been planning this for months, maybe longer. Thomas, she said, if you want to stop this, you need to document every detail. Dates, conversations, witnesses. And you need eyes in that house. Cameras, I said. She nodded. If he tries to set foot on your property, you'll have proof. And proof is what wins. That evening, I drove back into my neighborhood, but I didn't pull into my driveway. Instead, I parked 2 streets over and walked under cover of night. My own home looked foreign to me. The blinds drawn, Rachel's SUV in the driveway, porch light glowing. They were living comfortably, celebrating their victory, while I watched in the shadows like a stranger. Through the living room window, I could see them. Derek slouched on the couch, laughing, beer in hand. Rachel beside him, showing him something on her phone. For a moment, I thought I saw paperwork spread across the coffee table. Not bills, but contracts. I clenched my jaw. They hadn't wasted a second. The next morning, Graham helped me purchase a small set of discrete cameras. I waited until Derek and Rachel left the house. Probably keep celebrating. Then slipped inside with my spare key. My own living room smelled foreign, like Rachel's perfume. I planted cameras in the corners. Living room, kitchen, hallway, even near the office where I kept my documents. By the time I left, the house was wired, silent eyes watching. 2 days later, those eyes delivered. The footage showed Derek bringing in a man I didn't recognize. Older, in a suit, briefcase in hand. They sat at the kitchen table for nearly an hour. When I zoomed in on the recording later, my stomach turned. The papers bore my name, my signature, forged. The man in the suit tapped the lines. Rachel nodded. Derek laughed like he'd already won. I sent the clip straight to Graham. He called back within the hour, voice urgent. Thomas, I know that man. His name's Charles Hinton. He used to be a notary. Lost his license for shady practices. If Derek's using him, this isn't sloppy. It's criminal. They're fabricating documents to claim ownership of your house. I sat back, the motel chair creaking. So it wasn't just Derek, not just Rachel. They had outside help, and they'd been bold enough to bring him into my kitchen. It hit me then. This hadn't been a spur-of-the-moment betrayal. They'd been preparing for this for a long time. Every smile, every holiday dinner, every fake, "How are you, Dad?" had been covered while they plotted how to erase me. The rage that boiled up surprised even me. But under was something sharper, clarity. They thought they'd cornered me. In reality, they'd just handed me everything I needed. Proof, witnesses, a criminal partner on camera. And when the time came, I'd make sure the entire town saw it. The more I replayed that footage, the colder my anger became. Derek hadn't just betrayed me. He had turned my own house into a crime scene. Every time I pictured him sitting at my table with that crooked notary, I felt my blood pressure climb. But anger alone doesn't win battles. Evidence does. So I kept watching. On the 3rd day of surveillance, Rachel slipped into my office while Derek was out. I zoomed in on the recording. She was rifling through my filing cabinet, pulling out old tax documents, mortgage papers, even my wife's death certificate. Then she pulled out a folder I hadn't thought about in years. Sarah's life insurance. The policy was long paid out, but Rachel didn't know that. She took photos of every page, scrolling fast on her phone, like she couldn't wait to hand them off. My jaw tightened. They weren't just after my house. They were searching for every possible angle, every dollar, every document they could twist. I sent the footage to Graham immediately. His reply was sharp. She's gathering evidence to claim dependency. They're probably preparing to argue you can't manage finances. With the right forged paperwork, they could try to put you under guardianship. Guardianship. The word alone made my skin crawl. It meant being treated like a child, stripped of independence. Every decision funneled through them. It was worse than a nursing home. It was legal erasure. That night, Graham met me in the motel. He laid out a simple plan. We'd file for an emergency injunction with the court to block any transfer attempts. We'd register the video footage as evidence of conspiracy and fraud. We'd set a controlled confrontation to expose them in front of witnesses. I agreed to every step, but as I closed the folder, Graham hesitated. Thomas, you should know, if they're this desperate, they won't stop at paperwork. Be ready for pushback. I didn't know how right he was. The next morning, I went to the motel front desk. The clerk, a kid barely 20, handed me a note left in an unmarked envelope. It had my name scrawled across the front in a handwriting I didn't recognize. Inside was one sentence. Stop fighting us, or next time we won't just leave you on a mountain. No signature. No explanation. Just a threat. I stared at the words, my hands cold. Derek didn't write this. Rachel didn't either. This was someone else. Someone who knew where I was staying. I called Graham immediately. He told me to stay put, that he'd contact the sheriff's office. But I couldn't shake the feeling. There was another player in this game. Later that evening, the cameras confirmed it. A new face appeared in my living room. Heavy-set leather jacket, tattoo on his neck. Derek was pacing nervously, Rachel biting her nails. The man leaned across the table, jabbing his finger. The audio wasn't clear, but I could read Rachel's lips. We'll have the house, I promise. Just give us time. Loan shark. Enforcer. Suddenly it all fit. Derek's debts hadn't just pushed him toward me. They had dragged dangerous men into my home. I sent the clip to Graham. His reply came fast. Thomas, this just turned into organized fraud and possible racketeering. This isn't just family betrayal anymore. It's criminal conspiracy. For a moment, the motel room felt smaller, the air thinner. My son hadn't simply tried to take advantage of me. He had sold me out to predators who wanted my house as collateral. And yet, sitting there with the evidence on my laptop screen, I felt something else too, resolve. They had stacked the deck against me, but they didn't realize I'd been keeping score the whole time. The note, the videos, the forged papers. It was all falling into place. Derek thought he left me stranded in the mountains. He thought I was helpless. But I was about to show him that the man he abandoned wasn't broken. He was watching, and he was ready. The sheriff's office moved quicker than I expected. Within 24 hours, deputies had copies of the videos, the forged documents, and the threatening note. Graham told me quietly, Thomas, this is no longer a family dispute. It's fraud, elder exploitation, and possibly extortion. The court will take this seriously. Still, I couldn't shake the image of that man in the leather jacket, sitting in my living room, like he owned it. My house had become a meeting ground for criminals, and I was the prize they were fighting over. That night, I parked across the street again, hidden under the shadow of an oak tree. Through the window, I saw Derek pacing, Rachel whispering urgently. Then the enforcer returned. This time, he slammed the stack of papers on the table. Derek's face turned pale. Rachel clutched his arm. I strained to read his lips through the camera feed. Only fragments. Deadline payment. House. It hit me like a punch. Derek hadn't just promised them money. He had promised them my home as collateral. I sat back in the car, heart steady despite the storm inside me. Derek hadn't just tried to rob me. He had gambled my life's work to settle his own debts. The next morning, Graham met me at the courthouse. He'd filed for an emergency injunction. This will freeze all transactions involving your property, he explained. Even if Derek waves forged papers around, nothing can be sold or transferred until the hearing. Good, I said, but I want more than safety. I want this exposed. You'll get your chance, he promised. By midday, deputies served Derek with notice. I wasn't there to see it, but one of my neighbors told me later. He'd been drinking on the porch when the papers arrived, and he'd cursed loud enough for the whole street to hear. Rachel stormed back inside, slamming the door. That evening, the cameras caught the chaos. Derek shouting, Rachel pacing, both of them screaming at each other. But what chilled me was when Derek grabbed his phone and barked. "We move it up tonight." Move what up? 2 hours later, my phone buzzed with an alert from one of the cameras. Derek and Rachel were in my office again, this time dragging boxes, yanking out old files. They stuffed them into bags, frenzied, like thieves racing the clock. And then the enforcer walked in once more. But he wasn't alone. Another man followed, sharper suit, colder eyes. Not a thug this time, a businessman, the kind that smiles while tightening the noose. Rachel handed him the bag. He flipped through the papers, nodded once, and pulled out his phone. My stomach dropped when I realized what he was doing. Scanning. They were digitizing every document to submit remotely before the injunction could catch up. I called Graham immediately. They're trying to file tonight. "Send me the footage," he ordered. Within minutes, he was on the line with the sheriff. Deputies rolled out to the house before midnight. I wasn't there, but I watched on a live feed as red and blue lights flooded my driveway. The enforcer bolted out the back door. Rachel froze. Derek tried to argue, waving his arms, but deputies pushed him against the wall. The man in the suit tried to play calm, flashing a business card. One deputy just shook his head, bagging every document in sight. For the first time, I saw real fear on Derek's face. But the twist came the next morning. Graham called with news. The injunction held. But you need to know this. The man with Derek isn't just some shady friend. His name's Marcus Doyle. He's a licensed financial planner. And Thomas, he used to work for your bank. The pieces locked together. Doyle wasn't helping Derek as a friend. He was the inside man, the very person who could have pushed transactions through unnoticed. I gripped the phone tighter. My son hadn't just tried to ruin me. He had dragged a banker, a notary, and an enforcer into my life, all orbiting around my house. They thought I'd roll over. I said quietly. "No," Graham replied. "They thought you'd disappear." I hung up and sat in silence for a long moment. Derek believed he'd left me to die on a mountainside. What he didn't understand was that I'd climbed back down stronger. And now I had every piece of their conspiracy laid out like an engine on a workbench. All I had to do was tighten the final bolts. The morning after the deputies raided my house, I finally slept a full night. Not deeply, not peacefully, but enough. For the first time in days, I woke without the crushing weight of uncertainty. Still, my phone was buzzing by 8 a.m. Graham, Thomas, they filed emergency motions to delay the injunction. They're trying to claim you're unstable, that you've been hiding, and that your absence proves mental decline. I sat on the edge of the bed, rubbing my face. Absence? He left me on a mountain. I know, but to the court, you've been away from home for days. They'll spin that however they can. We need a medical statement today. By noon, I was sitting in a clinic, answering memory tests, recall questions, even drawing a clock face. I passed them all. The doctor signed off. Fully competent. No signs of cognitive decline. Another piece of armor. Graham met me afterward. We'll add this to the injunction file. It undercuts their entire argument. What about Doyle? I asked. Sheriff's office is investigating. If he pushed transactions through, he's finished. But it'll take time to untangle. For now, we focus on keeping your assets frozen and your name clean. That evening, I parked near O'Malley's bar again. It wasn't recklessness that drove me there. It was curiosity. I needed to see Derek, to gauge his state. Sure enough, there he was, hunched over a table, a drink in hand. Rachel sat across from him, tight-lipped. They weren't laughing now. Derek's hands moved furiously as he spoke, his face flushed with anger. I slipped inside, staying in the corner shadows. His voice carried across the bar. They think they got me beat. Dad's too stubborn, but I'll find another way. Doyle says there's still options. Rachel muttered something I couldn't hear, and Derek slammed his fist on the table. Don't talk about quitting. That house is mine. It was always supposed to be mine. I clenched my jaw. He wasn't broken. He was obsessed. As I left, one of the regulars, an old neighbor named Frank, caught my arm. "Tom, I thought you were out of town. Derek's been telling folks you checked into some hospital." I froze. "Hospital?" Frank nodded. Said you weren't all there anymore. That he was handling things now. I didn't believe him, but folks talk. My stomach turned. Derek wasn't just scheming in court. He was poisoning the community against me, laying groundwork for the story he wanted people to believe. The next morning, Graham was already waiting with paperwork. "We'll counter every move. The doctor's report kills their decline argument. Now, we prepare for the hearing. What about the threats? The note at the motel?" He shook his head. "The sheriff's office is still working leads. But Thomas, don't underestimate what you've already done. You've turned their secrecy into exposure. That's power." I nodded slowly. For years I'd thought of myself as just a tired old man with a house. But sitting there, listening to my lawyer layout strategy, I realized something. Derek and Rachel weren't the ones holding control anymore. I was. That night, back in the motel, I watched camera feeds again. Derek was in my living room, pacing like a caged animal, shouting at Rachel. But then he stopped, staring at the camera, straight at it. For a long moment, he didn't move, just glared, eyes dark, jaw tight. Then he stormed out of frame, slamming the door. I sat back in my chair, heartbeat steady. He knew I was watching, and I wanted him to know, because this time I wasn't the one trapped. He was. The courthouse was colder than the mountain Derek left me on. At least up there, the wind was honest. Here, the air hummed with whispered lies and legal jargon. Graham adjusted his tie as we walked toward the hearing room. "Remember, Thomas, you don't need to argue with him. You just tell the truth. The evidence will do the work." Inside, Derek was already seated with his attorney. Rachel sat beside him, her hands folded tight, lips pursed. For a fleeting second, I almost saw the girl who used to come over for dinner, laughing, sweet. But the look she shot me now was pure venom. The judge entered, and the bailiff called the room to order. The state began with the injunction. Graham laid out the videos, the forged papers, the clinic report proving my competence. Each exhibit landed like a nail in Derek's coffin. Then Derek's lawyer rose. "Your Honor, my client acknowledges some poor judgment, but this is a family matter, not a crime. Mr. Reed has been absent from his home, hiding in motels, displaying paranoid behavior. My client and his wife were only attempting to ensure his well-being." Paranoid. The word stung. I gripped the table until my knuckles whitened. Graham leaned over. "Breathe. Let him dig his own grave." Then it was my turn. The judge asked simple questions. Where I had been, why I left. I answered plainly. My son drove me into the mountains, asked me to take his picture. When I stepped out, he drove away. I walked hours back to town. I stayed in a motel because I feared for my safety in my own home. The courtroom shifted. Murmurs rippled through the benches. Derek's face flushed red. His lawyer jumped up. "Objection! That's an exaggeration. There's no proof." But Graham was ready. He pressed a button on the projector. Up came the footage. Derek in my living room with the notary, Rachel photographing my insurance papers, the enforcer slamming his fist on my table. The room went silent except for the tinny audio of Derek's voice. The house will be in my name soon. The judge leaned back, eyes narrowing. I've seen enough. During recess, I stepped into the hallway. My knees ached, but my mind was steady. Derek stormed out a few minutes later, Rachel chasing him. He spotted me instantly. "You think this is over?" he hissed, his voice low, sharp. "You think a judge will stop me? That house should have been mine years ago. You're just a stubborn old man who doesn't know when to let go." I met his glare with calm. "You left me for dead on a mountain. That's who you are. And now everyone else sees it too." For the first time, I saw something in his eyes besides rage. Fear. Rachel tugged his arm. "Derek, not here." They stalked off, whispers following them down the corridor. Back in the hearing room, the judge delivered the ruling. The injunction was upheld. Derek and Rachel were barred from entering my property or handling my affairs. Any attempt to contact me outside court would violate the order. When the gavel fell, I felt the first real weight lift from my shoulders. Not freedom, not yet, but the beginning of it. As we walked out, Graham leaned close. They'll push back. People like Derek always do, but you've shifted the battlefield. From now on, every step he takes will bury him deeper. I nodded. Good. Let him keep digging. That night, I returned to motel and sat watching the feed again. The house was empty, quiet for the first time in weeks, but I knew it wasn't peace. It was the eye of the storm, because Derek wasn't done. Not yet, and neither was I. The courthouse steps were crowded when we walked out. Reporters with cameras, neighbors whispering in small knots. Derek and Rachel pushed past them, heads down, but their shame followed like a storm cloud. I thought maybe, just maybe, they'd back off after the ruling, but I was wrong. The next morning, Graham called me into his office. His assistant had a stack of printouts waiting. Bank records. Phone logs. More than I'd expected. Thomas, Graham said, tapping the pages. Doyle's name appears on at least 3 suspicious transactions linked to Derek's account. Small amount at first, then larger transfers. It's not just collusion, it's embezzlement. I skimmed the pages, my hand steady. So, Derek wasn't just dragging me down. He was paying Doyle to grease the wheels. Exactly, and we have a witness. He nodded toward the door. A woman stepped in, mid-50s, professional suit, hair pinned back. This is Linda Powell. She worked with Doyle at the bank. Linda sat across from me, her expression grim. I couldn't ignore what I saw. Doyle bragged he had a client who was going to inherit early. He laughed about cutting corners, said nobody would question forged signatures from an old man. When I realized what he meant, I knew I had to come forward. For a moment, my throat tightened. It was one thing to suspect your son's betrayal, another to hear a stranger confirm it. Graham leaned back, satisfied. This testimony, combined with the footage, is enough to escalate charges. This isn't just elder exploitation anymore. It's fraud, forgery, and conspiracy. The DA will salivate. That night, I returned to motel, my head buzzing with everything Linda had said. I turned on the camera feeds, expecting the usual empty silence. Instead, I caught Derek back inside my house. He wasn't yelling this time. He wasn't even drunk. He was sitting at the kitchen table, head in his hands, Rachel pacing behind him. Then he looked up, his face hollow. We've lost, Ratch. It's over. Her voice was sharp, desperate. Not if you fight harder. Your dad won't last forever. All we need is one mistake. One. I leaned closer to the screen, my chest tightening. She wasn't backing down. If anything, she was doubling down, pushing him further into the pit. But Derek shook his head. The cops are watching. Doyle screwed. I can't fix this. Rachel slammed her hand on the table. You promised me that house. Her words rang through the cheap motel speakers like a confession. I hit record and saved the clip. The next day, Graham and I delivered everything to the DA's office. The assistant DA flipped through the files, watching the videos with a neutral face. When she finished, she said one word, solid. She looked at me. Mr. Reed, if you're willing to testify, we'll pursue full charges against your son, his wife, Doyle, and the notary. This won't be just a hearing. This will be a case. I nodded slowly. I'll testify. That evening, word must have spread, because when I stepped out of Graham's office, 2 men were waiting by my car. Not thugs, deputies. Mr. Reed, one said, we've been assigned to keep an eye out, just in case. I raised an eyebrow. Because of Derek? Because of the people Derek owes, the deputy corrected. For a long moment, I stared at the quiet street. Derek's greed had nearly buried me. Now it was going to bury him. Back in the motel, I sat with my notebook, adding the newest entries. Linda's testimony, Rachel's confession, Doyle's transfers. Each line was another nail in the coffin. I closed the book, leaned back, and whispered into the empty room, "Sarah, it's almost done." On the screen, Derek was still in my house, slumped at the table. Rachel was still pacing, but their voices no longer sounded like power. They sounded like defeat. And soon, the whole town would see it. The DA moved faster than I expected. Within 48 hours, subpoenas went out for Doyle, for the disgraced notary, and for Rachel. Derek was already under a restraining order, but now he was facing the very real prospect of indictment. Graham sat across from me in his office, tapping the edge of a thick folder. "Thomas, the next hearing is where everything will come to light, but I need you prepared. They'll smear you again. They'll claim you're confused, vindictive, that you're exaggerating. Are you ready for that?" I looked him dead in the eye. He left me on a mountain to die. I think I can handle words. That night, I drove past my neighborhood. Deputies were parked discreetly 2 houses down, watching. My home, looked sealed, silent. But inside, I could imagine the echoes. Derek pacing, Rachel whispering plans, Doyle calling his contacts, all of them scrambling to salvage what was already gone. I didn't go in. Not yet. Instead, I turned toward O'Malley's bar. Something in my gut told me Derek couldn't resist showing his face. Sure enough, there he was through the foggy window, hunched over the bar with 2 friends. A pitcher of beer between them. His voice carried even through the glass when he laughed. "Dad's done. The DA can't prove anything. Doyle says we just need one more document, and it all flips back. You'll see that house is mine." I froze in the shadows outside. Even now, after deputies, after cameras, after the judge's ruling, he was still clinging to the fantasy that I'd fold. And then came the part that nearly made me step inside right there. Rachel's voice, sharp over the din. "He won't last much longer anyway. We can just wait him out." Laughter followed. Derek's, his friends, Rachel's. A chorus of greed echoing through the night. I turned and walked away before anger made me reckless. Back at the motel, I reviewed the footage again. Rachel's confession, Linda's testimony, the forgeries. Piece by piece, the puzzle was complete. And then the camera caught something new. Doyle himself, back in my house, shredding papers. Bag after bag of ripped documents tossed into trash bags. Graham shook his head when I sent the clip. Classic panic move. He knows he's cornered. But what he doesn't know is that destruction of evidence is its own crime. He's only digging deeper. I allowed myself a thin smile. The morning of the next hearing, Graham handed me a clean suit jacket. "You need to walk in steady. Calm. Let Derek lose his temper. People like him always do." Inside the courthouse, the benches were fuller this time. Neighbors, curious onlookers, even a few reporters scribbling in notepads. Everyone wanted to see the spectacle. Rachel looked worn, dark circles under her eyes. Doyle sat stiff, jaw clenched. Derek was all bravado, grinning too wide, leaning back like he still owned the room. When the hearing began, the DA moved fast. Linda testified, clear and calm, about Doyle's words at the bank. The video played of Rachel slamming the table, shouting about the house. Then came the clip of Derek with the notary, laughing about his victory. The judge watched in silence, expression unreadable. Derek's lawyer tried to object, but every word sounded weaker than the last. Finally, Derek himself couldn't hold back. He stood, pointing at me. "He's lying. He's old, confused, bitter. That house should be mine. Everyone knows it." The courtroom buzzed. The judge slammed the gavel. "Mr. Reed, sit down." But the damage was done. His outburst had painted him exactly as he was, entitled, reckless, and desperate. When the session adjourned, I walked out slowly, Graham at my side. Behind me, I heard Derek's voice cracking, Rachel whispering frantic reassurances. I didn't turn. I didn't need to, because soon his smile would disappear for good. By the time the next weekend rolled around, the town was buzzing. Word of the hearings had spread, twisted and stretched in every retelling. Some said I'd gone crazy. Others whispered Derek had tried to have me declared missing. Everyone had their version, but none of them had the full truth. Not yet. Graham looked me dead in the eye that Saturday morning. Thomas, you asked for exposure. Tonight, you'll get it. Deputies will be on standby. You walk in calm and steady. Let the evidence speak for itself. I nodded. I'd spent nights planning for this moment. Tonight wasn't just about court rulings or injunctions. It was about reclaiming my name, my dignity, my place in the very town Derek tried to turn against me. The sun had barely dipped below the horizon when I drove into town. O'Malley's bar was packed, neon buzzing, voices spilling into the street. I parked down the block, straightened my jacket, and walked. Through the window, I could see him, Derek, front and center, a crowd around him, beer in hand, grin plastered across his face. Rachel sat beside him, laughing too loudly, forcing the act. As I pushed open the door, the noise hit me like a wave. Derek was in the middle of a story, arms wide, voice booming. The old man's tucked away, trust me. That house is as good as ours. Papers are lined up. Doyle says it's just a matter of time. Hell, I'll be hosting the next poker night in my own living room. Laughter exploded around him. His grin stretched wider. And then his eyes found mine. The grin froze. The color drained. For a second, he looked like he was seeing a ghost. The bar quieted as people turned, following his stare. I stepped inside, Graham at my shoulder, a deputy just behind. Evening, Derek. I said evenly. He shot to his feet, beer sloshing onto floor. You're supposed to, he caught himself, words choking off. Rachel went pale, clutching his arm. Graham didn't waste time. He set a thick folder on the bar. Ladies and gentlemen, he said, voice calm but carrying. This is a record of Derek Reed's conspiracy to defraud his father. Forged signatures, bank collusion, recorded confessions. All of it. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Heads turned. People who'd known me for decades, neighbors, co-workers, old friends, were staring at Derek like they were seeing him for the first time. The deputy stepped forward, badge glinting in the neon. Derek Reed, you're under investigation for fraud, exploitation, and conspiracy. I suggest you sit down. For a moment, Derek didn't move. His fists clenched. His eyes darted, searching for escape. But there was none. Rachel tried to speak, but the words came out broken. We didn't mean. The deputy cut her off. Ma'am, you'll have your turn. Derek's friends backed away, their laughter gone, replaced by disgust. One muttered, Jesus, man. Before slipping out the door, Derek finally sank back onto his stool, his grin gone, shoulders slumped. The room he'd ruled with bravado, just minutes earlier, now looked at him with contempt. I stood tall, meeting his eyes. You left me on a mountain to die, Derek, but you forgot one thing. I came back. Silence hung heavy. His mouth opened, then closed, no words coming. The deputy placed a hand on his shoulder. Time to go. As they let him out, Rachel trailing behind, the bar erupted, not in laughter, but in whispers, sharp and cutting. His reputation, his pride, his future, stripped away in the very place he'd tried to celebrate his victory. And me? I just stood there, steady, letting the truth settle over every witness in that room. The house was mine. My name was mine. My life was mine. And Derek's smile was gone forever.